we actually are planning on doing a franchisee summit of sorts coming up in the spring for folks in our community that are interested in being franchisees and invest in restaurants, because we do have, I can't tell you which ones, but we do have some restaurants that have told us, we'll come to Victoria if you can find us a franchisee.
What's up, everyone? Thank you again for tuning into Town Talk. We're here to talk about the town, in case you missed it. This is episode 4, and in case you missed our prior episode or our promotional items, which I hope you didn't, this is our Fire Away Q&A, where we're going to ask someone very special a bunch of questions, and he's going to try and fire off some answers. We didn't tell him all the questions we're going to ask, because that's the point, but we are excited to have here in the house, and I hope he sounds normal, because I think he's battling a little bit of a throat thing. I'm not going to say the man.
Please don't.
It's Jesus, our city manager. I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
Where's the button? Where's the button?
That is our stellar production team over there keeping us covered with the sound effects.
Keeping us hype.
If anyone does the goat noise today, I will leave.
I need to find a legit walk-up song of sorts.
They see me rolling.
No.
I am the man by...
I'm just kidding.
El jefe de jefes.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know that one. So these questions came directly from whether it be the last 3 episodes that we've debuted about Town Talk, on the comments thread, directly to our email inbox that we put out there on Danielle's episode, which came out a few weeks ago, communications@victoriatx.gov, in case you're wondering if you could submit some for future episodes, you can. And so the first question that we thought was, we selected a few because we can't answer them all, obviously. But one of the fun ones, which piggybacks off of what Danielle was talking about with retail recruitment and kind of the industry of restaurants, but also it's like a national thing. It's a business thing. We don't control what businesses come and go, right? So the question is, why don't we have a Luby's? If y'all remember, back then it used to be in the mall where James Avery currently is. The follow-up to that was, why don't we get one back? Everyone clearly has a little appetite for Luby's, or maybe has some fond memories like I did, growing up here in Victoria. And so why don't we get one back? I know part of the answer, but...
What do you think, Jesus?
It's hard for me to not answer some of these.
Excuse me. I mean, my first thought was, didn't Luby's file for bankruptcy? And so...
Yes, sadly.
Yeah, they did in 2010.
Oh.
But apparently started making a comeback of some kind.
Really?
So I'm not familiar with what their
Interesting.
What their setup is, or if there are even any Luby's still open.
Did you know that
Actually,
there's
there is.
Yes, I was going to say.
Yeah, the Luby's
Port Lavaca?
Well, the Luby's in my hometown in Brownsville is actually open.
Oh, nice.
I just had lunch there with my family earlier in the year.
There was one that Alvesa, our
so
admin
if you like to go
assistant,
to
found
Luby's,
out.
Go to Brownsville, Texas, my hometown.
Or Port Lavaca. There's like a little mini spin-off of it in a hospital. Just Google it.
Really?
Yeah, like a limited menu, I think.
Do you have to be a patient
stay
at the
in
hospital
Victoria
to go there?
and go to HEB and buy Luby's mac and cheese or their fried catfish, and you get a little taste of your childhood.
Yeah,
your memories. All right, well, that was an easy one. Okay, so the other one that always... What's
Real
up?
quick.
You got more info?
Memorial Medical Center's Cafe is energizing your dining experience with so many choices and endless options. Features the Luby's comfort foods.
That's it. I told you.
What?
I know. A little hole in the wall, apparently. But don't go there. Stay in Victoria. Use your sales tax dollars here.
Or
at
go
HEB.
to Brownsville.
Go to Brownsville and use your sales tax dollars there.
Yeah,
I've been
sure,
to
why not?
Brownsville, actually.
My family want better roads too.
Do they still live there?
Yes.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind if I'm ever down there. What about the future of Cracker Barrel? I've joked literally every single episode about it because it's the one that I consistently hear from friends, family, coworkers, even online from Victorians is, I want a Cracker Barrel. There was literally a comment. I don't know who you are, but if you're listening, I hope you are. When we were promoting Danielle's episode, she goes, I don't remember her name. I know it was a female. She goes, I don't want it if it's not something or Cracker Barrel. And I loved that comment because I feel that. So anyway, are we ever going to get one? What's the situation? People seem to think that they're not going to come back. There was even some hearsay going on to her comment online. Like some people were chiming in and saying, well, I heard blah, 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 blah. So what's the word on the street with that?
Well,
What did they hear?
we have 2 Cracker Barrels in town.
I feel like this is like the
Where you can
saying
buy
to the
something
parent,
like this.
like, oh, can we get Cracker Barrel? Oh, we have Cracker Barrel at
wait, I
home.
gotta do the hands.
Meanwhile, the Cracker Barrel at home.
We have 2 Cracker Barrels in town.
We only had that sound effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. Good job, George.
Yes. But definitely the question about a specific restaurant
Yes.
is certainly worthwhile addressing. To piggyback off of what Danielle talked about,
Yeah.
When companies are looking to expand, they're very, very specific on what they're looking for. And it can get very scientific, meaning restaurants, for example, might say, okay, I need to be in a location with such and such next to me. There's plenty of restaurants or stores that say, I will only go if there's a Burlington next door.
Right.
This is why sometimes when you travel to certain shopping centers in other communities, you find the same stores right next to each other with the same type of restaurants right in front of them, because their business model confirms that being together is a success for them.
Right.
And so oftentimes we just don't have the other retail components that warrant having that particular restaurant. But ultimately, it's tied back to demographics and density. And so many restaurants and retailers say, within 5 miles of my store or restaurant, I need to have this many people living there and making this much amount of money, having the certain education levels. I mean, it gets very specific because their data, obviously, they obviously want to make a profit, right? They want to have a successful business, and they're not going to come in and open a restaurant or expand to Victoria unless they have the data that backs up that they can be successful. And so oftentimes when people want a specific store or a specific restaurant, it can be an issue of us not meeting those specific requirements.
Right.
Or sometimes we do meet the specific requirements, and if that particular restaurant has a franchisee model, it's simply a matter of finding a franchisee. And sometimes that can be difficult. And so we actually are planning on doing a franchisee summit of sorts coming up in the spring for folks in our community that are interested in being franchisees and invest in restaurants, because we do have, I can't tell you which ones, but we do have some restaurants that have told us, we'll come to Victoria if you can find us a franchisee.
Wow.
And it can be very difficult to have a franchisee from, let's say, Houston market want to expand to Victoria because it's just too far away for them to make sure that it's successful, et cetera. And so markets like ours that are not close to large metro areas truly do necessitate like our own group of franchisees that want to take some of these projects on. And so I don't know if Cracker Barrel has a franchisee model or not, but in some instances, that's the issue as well.
Right.
And I don't know if I want to put this bug in people's ears. So if you want to say no comment to this, feel free. But at council, there's been a lot of talk about utility improvements on the I-69 corridor area. And that's obviously corridor highway that's some prime real estate, presumably. Do you think that project in the future could open us up to not just more businesses, but to different kinds as well?
Short answer, yes. I do think that we have a lot of people and money that passes by through Victoria every day along 59 or future I-69, and we're missing out on that. And so part of the objective in trying to improve utilities along that corridor is to help facilitate development. So when it does want to go there, we have the public infrastructure for it to go there.
Right.
Sometimes we have to get creative, and the Texan is a perfect example. When the Texan developed there at the intersection of 59 and 185, there weren't any utilities on that side of the highway, and so we basically collaborated with the developer to extend utilities to that side of the highway and build a lift station that has opened up now hundreds of acres for development in that area. And now you're seeing other things in the works. So Billy Catan, for example, is going to be building out there. If it weren't for this lift station that was installed at the time of the Texan, Billy Ticketen wouldn't have anywhere to send their waste.
Right.
And so those are the types of investments that could be there and ready for development.
Right.
We also, just as a overarching approach, want to have more development balance. And certainly the east and southeastern part of our community has a lot of opportunity with land that we could potentially make developable through some of those investments.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's also a lot of industrial type of development out there. And so that can also contribute to our tax base and contribute to creating jobs and so on and so forth. And so we just want to be prepared for that.
Right. So you were talking about franchisees, right? Or kind of a business interest if there's available opportunities there. Well, there's also developable land and then, vacant lots, things like that. Is that kind of a factor too? Are there a lot of those costs that can creep up when a business decides whether they want to come to a place or not? Because you were talking about some socioeconomic demographics
Sure.
as one of them, but are they also looking
point.
at, well, is there an existing place for me to set up shop? And if there's not, then that's another amount of significant cost, and that's where we kind of come in with maybe some incentives.
That certainly can be part of the equation, and I'll give you a very specific example. Boot Barn. Whenever you have retailers that come into our market, they make projections on how much the quantity of the sales that they're gonna have. They expect to have. And it goes without saying probably, but obviously if you're in a large metro area that has more people, your sales are going to be much higher because you have more people with more money that are going to be buying the product. So one of the challenges that we have is that since we are a smaller market, medium-sized market, oftentimes these developers do necessitate financial assistance for infrastructure because their performas don't have them making as much money in Victoria as they would in a larger community. And so in a larger community, for example, a developer would absorb the expense of extending their own water lines, extending their own sewer. They'll absorb the cost of having to upgrade a traffic signal or having to do all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. And in our market, it's very difficult for a developer for development to make sense financially for the developer because of the volume of the sales here is just different compared to a larger market.
Sure.
And so, for example, with the Boot Barn and some of the improvements that are going on there around the Home Depot, we contributed, over $800,000 to relocate the ramp.
Right. That was part of the
off the
380
loop.
agreement.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Danielle talked about
And
last
so
episode.
That's an example of a scenario where, we used public dollars to help with public infrastructure to help lessen the expense of the development because otherwise it just would not have had happened.
Right. And it's not just the development of Boot Barn. It facilitates further development like you were talking about,
Correct.
like over at the Texan.
Right. It opens hundreds of acres for development.
There you go.
Correct.
So if it's even more beneficial for us as an entity to invest in those sort of projects, not just for that one retailer, but for future development as well. So I learned that the last episode again. So if you haven't checked it out, please do. Okay, so this is quick fire, lots of questions. So the next question that came in, and this is an interesting one because for people who are so ingrained in city government and they know all the whys and the what, I'm basically talking about you and council, but maybe some of who know a lot of the maybe even context around certain questions that come up online. One of the ones that staff and I found that we thought was interesting because we recognized it was kind of a common not misconception, but theme that came up was the question around water parks. And if I couldn't answer that, I thought, well, that's a good question to ask. And it's a fire away, right? So we don't have to spend too long on it. I think it's a quite nebulous topic, maybe pretty complex, lots of things going into that. And so I think what I would hope is just maybe like a simple answer that I could take away, maybe even Sam and I, whoever else is listening, and simply share that with their community and be like, while it is desirable for any community, whoever might want it.
To have a water park?
Yeah, like whoever might be, meaning the residents here, asking for it, what does that actually look like from the people who actually have to plan for it, which is us, all the different departments in the city, and then whoever else plays a role in that. So the simple question is, why do we not have one? Is that a possibility?
Well, I think there's definitely a lot of angles that one could take that topic. I think the best way to address it is if you were to ask 10 people to define what a water park is, you're going to get 10 different answers. And in my experience with the individuals that have asked me this question or have brought up the topic, some are talking about they envision something like a splashway. Mm-hmm. And then others are simply talking about a public pool with some slides. Mm. And so, and I don't know, on the spectrum, right, where people might be on that thought process.
I think for us in Victoria, because we're in proximity to Sheridan, we always talk about it that way. And naturally, this, Jesus, people are always comparing Victoria, people who live here, to the surrounding communities. So I think that's where they're coming from.
Well, I mean, to that end, we're blessed to have Splashway,
yeah.
Within an hour or less from us. The market would just not be there for there to be something of that extent, close by. And so the reality is that we're not a Houston, we're not in Austin, we don't have millions of people here. And so the fact that we have Splashway, again, an hour, less than an hour away is actually a blessing because there are a lot of communities across the state that don't have that opportunity of a water park anywhere near that close, right? However, for people that might think of it more on the other side of the spectrum, which is more of a public pool with some slides, because the city historically did have some public pools, and the city got away from it. And the public may or may not know that the city has an agreement with the YMCA where during the summer, during certain days and times, that pool is open to the public for free. And so you don't have to be a member of the YMCA to access the pool and those aquatic amenities during certain days and times during pool season.
Right.
And so, and a lot of people don't know that. Now, will the city ever sort of get back to a place of having and managing their own pool? Probably not. There's a lot of liability issues that can come with that, and a lot of cities are getting away from it. Mm-hmm. But there could be opportunities to at least build upon and enhance some of the aquatic amenities that we have invested in. And so, for example, we have 3 splash pads, and we have begun and will begin designing a 4th splash pad that'll go inside Riverside Park.
Super excited about that.
And even though that's years away from actually happening, the direction from City Council for that specific splash pad has been that splash pad needs to have more amenities for older kids so that it can be a differentiator between the other splash pads around our community. Right. And so I fully expect that splash pad at Riverside Park will have a slide or just some other things that are a step higher than the existing splash pad.
The 4th new splash pad is the one that's going to be inside Riverside Park. Children's Park, is that what I recall?
They'd be right next to each other.
Yeah. Because that one itself is going to be expanded as well and I guess shifted around a little bit. Yeah. So I'm excited about that too. I have little ones, so definitely need things to keep them busy.
And one last thought on that, if I may, because, and I had completely forgotten about this, but since I didn't know the questions ahead of time, it's coming back to me now. But we did actually engage a consultant within my first year here, so it would have been 2019, that specialized in the development of water parks. And he actually came in and did a very informal assessment of our community, and basically the finances would have been very difficult to achieve. Starting from scratch, I vaguely remember him mentioning that, even if we were to do something basic in terms of a water park, regardless of who paid for it or where the money came from, you're talking $10 to $15 million investment. And so, how are you going to recover your money? Is the is it actually going to be there? Right. And so his assessment was basically that our market would not be able to sustain building one from scratch.
Right.
Just for what it's worth.
Yeah. Well, that's great, though, that you did your due diligence there to get some feedback from a professional who does this sort of thing. That's interesting. Well, that we now know how to answer those questions, so I appreciate your response on that. In, I guess, relation to water, we're going to stay on that topic. Some other thoughts again, and I think this one's probably even more easy and quick for you to answer. As we are close in proximity again to neighboring communities like San Antonio, they have a river walk.
San Antonio.
Yes, they got a river walk. That is so cool. why can't we have one? You know, that's naturally what you think. The comparison trap, right? If you
Well,
will.
in San Antonio's case, that's not really a river. You know, it's basically a man-made
Right.
detention canal. And so it was a flood mitigation project.
Right.
And so that was very intentionally designed to, you know, for that purpose at the time. So I don't know if people are suggesting that we somehow build, you know, canal somewhere and get water to it and then build along it. That's just cost prohibitive for us to even, you know, explore that. If someone if someone, when they say that, mean developing better around our existing river location, then what we need to keep in mind when we think about that is that because it is a real river, a river that's downstream, nonetheless, it's basically impossible to develop anything around it because of how often it floods.
Right.
And obviously, us being in Victoria, we know how often that happens, how often the park has to be shut down in certain areas, you know, et cetera. And so developing along our existing natural river is challenging because of it being a natural river and because being downstream.
Right.
Sometimes people ask, not necessarily about Riverwalk in San Antonio, but they'll say, well, why can't we float the river like we can, you know, in New Braunfels, as an example? And the differentiator there is that we're downstream. So again, you know, when it rains in New Braunfels, the river in New Braunfels doesn't flood.
We do.
We do, right? And so you can't just float down our particular stretch of the river because it's just not as safe to do so.
Yep.
Now you can kayak, you know, and do things of that sort. And people do float. You know, they get out there, they go to Pebble Beach, you know, things of that sort. But because of how often the river level fluctuates and how often it floods, it's much harder for that to be a dependable, reliable, consistent experience.
Right. Cool.
And
That's
I think
a
it's
pretty
safe
good
to
answer.
say that the city is looking at the park. You know, we have the park's master plan that called out Riverside's park specifically to look at improvements. The zoo has their master plan as well. So the children's park improvements we just mentioned.
Yeah.
So I think that there is like an appetite and a willingness to look at improvements to the park and the park experience. But like you said, there are just those parameters because it's in a flood zone.
Right. Cool. Next question. We're going to switch it up. Why is Victoria's
No
tax
water?
rate? Why is it Victoria's tax rate what it is today?
Wait, what?
Why is Victoria's tax rate what it is today?
I think what kind of spurred this is there was a comment on Facebook where somebody said something like, "Why does Victoria have such a high tax rate compared to the rest of the state?" But I don't think that's actually the case. I think that we're pretty much not unusually high for the state of Texas. Would you say that that's the case?
Yeah, I think that one thing that it's important to mention is that there are several entities that levy a property tax. School district, Victoria College, Navigation District. Depending on what part of town you're in, you might have a drainage district assessment, county, city, right? There isn't a master influencer of all of those tax rates. Every entity handles their own tax rate under their own rules, their own stipulations, their own policy directions from their respective elected officials or from their respective boards. So it'd be very difficult to compare total tax rate amongst all entities to other communities. Because some communities may not have a community college, for example. Some communities may not have a navigation district property tax, but some communities might have a different tax. You know, some communities have emergency service districts that levy property taxes. We don't have an ESD, for example. So every community is different. So the best way that I can answer that or address that topic is solely focused on what is under the city's purview, which is the city's tax rate. And so when folks make the comment or observation that, hey, my taxes are high, they're obviously referring to the combination of all of these different assessments, right? Or the levy of the tax, I should say. But to your point, Sam, you know, when we look at just cities in particular, we're certainly not anywhere near, the highest tax rate, not even in our region. And so, for example, I was in Kingsville before coming to Victoria. In Kingsville, the tax rate's in the 70s. We just adopted a tax rate at 47 cents, basically, and Kingsville's in the 70s, as an example. And many of our communities that are in the region that we sometimes compare ourselves to actually have a higher tax rate than us. And one of the things that's very timely about your question is that I actually recently asked staff to put together a comparative analysis on tax rate, tax base, things of that sort, because of what I alluded to in the podcast, a couple months ago or last month about the correlation between growth and money, right? And so as we continue this educational campaign to educate people on why we have limited money, all of that plays a role. Everybody knows there's a correlation between your assessed value and tax rate, and the reality is that the higher the valuation, the greater the opportunity to lower the tax rate. And some communities have taken advantage of doing that, and some haven't. In Victoria, historically speaking, the policy direction from elected officials has been to keep a low property tax rate intentionally. And so there's been a huge benefit to our residents over decades because of that. The con of that is that there's not as much money coming into our budget, which puts us behind in comparatively speaking to other communities. And I'll give you one example that I just popped up. So Baytown, I mentioned it 2 months ago that we have about $6 billion in appraised value in our community, and that Sugar Land had like $21 billion.
Yep.
Is that commercial and residential both?
Yeah, combined. Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
And so, and some other things that it includes. But for example, in Sugar Land, the tax rate's in the 30s. But it can be in the 30s because their assessed value is $21 billion.
Right.
Baytown, for example, has total appraised values of $5 million, so just a little bit smaller than us. But their tax rate's 72 cents. So their general fund is 138 million. Ours is just shy of 60. And so there's a comparable community in terms of tax base. So Baytown's got 5 million in assessed values, but a tax rate of 72. So their general fund's 138 million. Ours is 6 billion with a tax rate of 47 cents. So our general fund's just 60. So you can start to kind of get a feel for the correlation between assessed values and tax rates. A few other examples. Corpus Christi has a tax rate of 59 cents. San Antonio's at 54. Baytown's at 72. Bryan, near College Station's at 62. San Marcos is at 60. And again, we're at 47 cents. And so the reality is that our tax rate's actually low compared to many communities in our region and across the state.
Right.
But why we struggle with revenue is not because of the tax rate per se, but a combination of our assessed values have not increased because we haven't grown compared to other communities. So again, our tax rate is what it is because of previous policy decisions by elected officials and because of the lack of growth in our tax base.
Yeah.
But it's not the highest tax rate.
Not at all.
Not even close.
Not by far.
In our region or in the state.
Can you talk a little bit while we're on the topic, and then I'll ask my last question. You had mentioned a few council meetings ago in one of your presentations about there being a cap placed on it by the state. And I'm just curious what that is and how it relates to the tax rate. There's like a max we can use, but it kind of puts us in a bind. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk about that real quick?
Sure. So the state
remember.
of Texas, a few legislative sessions ago, passed SB2. It's referred
Yes.
to as SB2.
Thank you. I couldn't remember what
And
it's called.
they basically cap cities' property tax revenue from existing properties. They cap it at growing at 3.5% every year. And if you grow it above that, you have to go to the voters to increase the tax rate, which is what the school district just tried to do.
Yep.
Right. The school district said, hey, we want to actually generate more money to pay teachers more money, but they had to put it on the ballot in order for people to vote on it because the school board didn't have the discretion to be able to increase it more than a certain limit.
Right.
Right. Excuse me. And so obviously that's a good thing in general because the reality is that some cities were taking advantage of their taxpayers and milking them as much as possible. However, the reality, though, is that we're competing with these cities. And so if for 20 years, let's use Baytown as an example. If for 20 years, Baytown was maximizing their revenue by the previous max, which was 8%, not 3.5%, then they're at a much higher starting point than we are once the 3.5% cap came into play. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we're so behind compared to these other cities that were taking advantage of maximizing their revenue by either increasing their tax rates or keeping them the same. That now, if I can only grow at 3.5% and Baytown can only grow at 3.5% and Sugar Land can only grow at 3.5%, we're never going to catch up.
It locks us in, essentially.
So it locks us in at being behind.
Yeah.
Right. And so that makes it even more challenging for us to increase our revenue to be able to compete with other cities that just have more money. And Baytown is a perfect example, right? Because their taxable appraised values is $5 billion. They have about 80-something thousand people that live in Baytown. But they clearly made conscious decisions over decades to keep or not lower their tax rate, hence why it's at 72. But that 72 gets them a bunch more money today, which is more than 130 million. And again, we're at 60. So it just makes it difficult and it makes it challenging.
That's wild.
And in the city management profession and Texas Municipal League and others, have consistently said or have tried to convey to the legislature, like, hey, let us at the local level decide that.
Yeah.
Because why is the state pre-deciding, for cities on what to do with their tax
and treating
rates?
us all like we're in the same situation too.
Yeah.
And we know our community best. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Good topic. If we had a fuller episode, I would love to sit on that a little more. Maybe we bring it back. That goes back into our growing Victoria topic. If we have a minute, I want to kind of conclude with more of a lighthearted one, a little lighter topic with all the visible, I guess, construction, kind of retail related construction going on around town. One of the fun ones I noticed and I got the scoop on was Long John Silver's. That one's kind of fun because it's been around for quite some time. I don't even know when it wasn't in Victoria. That shows you how long, if you know my age. And as part of that, I heard that Long John Silver's was actually doing so well here in Victoria for whatever reason in the market that they're renovating. So that construction right there is actually a renovation and they're doing good. So that's cool. Then I also heard PJ's Coffee is rebranding. I mentioned it in Danielle's episode. They're not going away. We all got pretty bummed. We thought they were closing their doors. Well, it's just the franchisee of PJ's Coffee, but they're actually rebranding to Southern Blend, I believe is what it's called. And so they're going to open back up. Same location, a little bit of a different format. Excited to go check it out again. I was always a big supporter of any local coffee shop. Sip and Shine, come to think of it, I think they're temporarily closed too, but they're going to relocate as well. So keep your eyes and ears peeled, guys. Are there any other vacant spots, I guess, or like reconstruction that you guys are recognizing in the retail market?
Well, the only one that comes to mind is the Boot Barn area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if if the developer's expanding over there. Maybe Danielle can answer that one later. When they decide.
Yeah, time will tell.
I'm not trying to get ahead of that one.
Right.
Cart before the horse.
Well, keep in mind that there's also spaces that in existing developments, like, for example, where Bed Bath & Beyond was.
Yeah.
There's also an empty space over in the mall still, I believe, behind Murdoch's. And I found out about it because that's where Spirit Halloween opened.
Right, that's where Bell's was.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's an example of, their space in existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
So when retailers are exploring their options, it's not just about, what new shopping center is going to be built next to Home Depot. It's, hey, where is our empty space?
Right.
I've been born and raised here. I said it before. This community of Victorians should take pride in what all's coming, what all's evolving here. Whether you're a business owner or not, there's so much to get excited about. So be a part of that. Be a solution-based person. And we hope that you'll continue to stay tuned. Guys, before I sign off, I want to say thanks to Sam for hopping in on this one. Always love having you on the show. You're a great commentator, contributor. If you haven't heard this episode before or this show before, this episode, I'm going to say, Sam is, thank you, was not prepared for that. But yes, we love having you on because you help me with run our social media accounts. And so there's a lot of questions, comments, concerns that our residents have and that help, bring these questions to the right people so we can get some answers. And of course, thanks to our guest today, which is our city manager, Jesus. So thanks for giving us all the details, all the scoop, all the information. I know our community appreciates it. We just want to thank, of course, our community of listeners too.
Happy to come on whenever you invite me to answer any questions that might come your way.
For sure. Cool. Well, thanks again, guys. We'll talk to you next time. Good topics coming up. We're going to talk to some really big businesses here in Victoria, organizations. Really excited about the next one. We're going to tease that one a little bit later. But anyway, we'll talk to you next time. Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Town Talk. If you liked what you heard, please like, share, subscribe, do all the things to get this message out to the community because this is your community after all. Stay informed, stay engaged. We want to hear from you. Send us an email or comment, communications@victoriatx.gov, and we'll talk to you next time.